We've been examining the causes of the current strike by Nigerian public university lecturers and what can be done to end their summer of withering discontent. We've heard from a student and a lecturer and from a member of the government's team that's negotiating with the academic staff union. We'll be considering all they've said and more with our two analysts who are with me, as I said, for the rest of the program to offer their perspectives on the news and talking points of the day. The journalist, policy strategist and Arise News analyst Waziri Adio, who's written extensively about education in Nigeria and about striking lecturers. And also with me is the education consultant Charles Omofomwan, who's the founder of Noble Missions, an education-focused NGO based here in Abuja. Thank you, gentlemen, very much indeed for joining us. Let me come to you first, Waziri Adio. What do you think needs to be done to end these strikes and to improve the climate, not only at the universities, but between the lecturers and the government?
Okay, thank you very much. This has been going on forever. In 23 years, 24 years, we've had strike for 18 times, right? And it's going to continue. Clear that they're going to end this one, but this will not be the end of it. They will just kick the can down the road, and 2 years max, we're going to be back on the same spot. The problem is that we're not facing the real challenge in the tertiary educational sector, especially the public education part of it. So the first thing, I have a few ideas about things to be done. The first thing is that we need to change how we fund our public universities. By the way, the public universities, account for more than 94% of the students who are in school in Nigeria presently. So we have to fix that problem. It's too big to fail, not just for the students and their parents, but for the country itself. You cannot compete in the 21st century, which is the knowledge age, if you don't get that right. If you are leaving your human capital unattended to. The first thing we need to look at is that the way we fund universities now is that we fund salaries. A former Vice Chancellor of the University of Lagos, Professor Bello, did a paper where he said in Nigeria, our universities spend between 90 and 95% of their budget on salaries, on personnel. And, in other places, they spend between 40 to 60%, which means you can have money for other things, the infrastructure and all of that. So I looked at the 2022 budget, and the university with the highest budgets happens to be the University of Nigeria, Nsukka, and it has 23.9 billion naira allocated to it. 96% of that is for personnel, which means you have only 4% for overhead and for capital. And if you have that, you have the kind of problem that you have. But, in other places, what they do is that you establish the cost of training a student, right? So that is what you fund. So what you have now is that you have some institutions that have more lecturers than others, even when they have fewer students.
Right, but you say you've done analysis. I mean, do you know why that costs so much just to pay people? Well,
actually, what they are paying them is peanuts. The highest paid professor.
So are they employing too many staff, or what is it?
The point I'm trying to make is that we need to bring the students at the center of the funding. Let it be about the students so that we can, how much do you need to train a student in a year? So put the funding around that. That's the first thing. The second thing is that we need to ensure that the universities, the public universities, have a diversified, robust, sustainable funding base. The idea that the universities are owned by government doesn't mean that government has to fund it exclusively. We need to expand the options.
Absolutely.
Including
that's what we're trying to discuss with these
co-funding from
I think
the students.
Those are very good ideas.
Grants from other institutions, money they can make from research, and also money from their alumni. I went to schools outside of this country, right? And almost every week you get a mail from them asking you to contribute to something or the other. I graduated in 1992 from Unilag. I've never received a mail from them to say, want you to do this. The other thing is that the infrastructure we have is totally collapsed. In the universities, they are not good for research. They are not good for teaching. They are not good even for habitation.
But that's
if you go to the
part of the complaint of the lecture.
Yes. So what needs to be done? One, we have TED Fund that gives money in drips to these institutions. What I'm proposing is that give the institutions lump sum like 10 to 20 billion, each institution. The money you are going to get from TED fund, take a bond against it. That money is paid for. Every company pays 2% of their profit to the TED fund. So take a bond against that. You know that that money will always come. Give these institutions a lump sum to fix their infrastructure. At the same time, there's some infrastructure that you can use public-private partnership for, like accommodation, for example. Get the private sector to come and build that. Let the ones that you can charge user fee, let that happen. The other thing that you need to do is you need to decentralize the management of the universities and give them full autonomy. You don't continue to run the universities the way you run civil service. Let me give you an example. Let each university have its own condition of service, its own curriculum, based on its own environment. There's no point where a university based in Lagos will have the same condition of service with a university based in Gashua, when you know that the condition of service, the condition of living will be different. So we need to entirely rethink how we fund, how we resource, how we run our public institutions. Otherwise, you'll be coming back to this problem. Because we're not going to have enough funding.
Thank you very much for that. Let me bring you in, Charles Omofomwan. Thank you for your patience. What do you make of what you've heard so far?
Well, I think he has basically said everything. So an average Nigerian would think this way, especially if you're not in the system. So you don't
you are an
think this
education consultant. You run an NGO that focuses on education.
So if I pick some point from what you said, like having government give these universities lump sum is like the endowment fund in these foreign universities. Every university has an endowment fund. And I think University of Texas, as at 2020, had over $30 billion in the endowment fund. So that's the idea. So you don't depend solely on government funding. Yes, of course, I'm agreeing. So you don't depend solely on the government. And I know that some universities have their own internal ways of generating revenue. I don't know if they are being accounted for. But I remember in school where I graduated from, they had microfinance bank. And it's a bank, so it's not a charity institution, so it's supposed to generate revenue. So is that being accounted for? There are some universities that have bottled water production companies. So what do they really do with those revenue? I don't know, because I'm not in that system. But every university must begin to think how to generate its revenue. But we cannot shy away from the fact that the government needs to be more responsible.
But in that context then, how important is this strike? Because it is, the lecturers are arguing that it is the strikes that would lead to this sort of thing, that if they sat back, nothing would happen.
So, which I think that highlights what I said in my last statement. The government needs to be more responsible. Because if the lecturers know that the government is responsible and that they are responsive to the needs of the universities, they won't go on strike. They can easily sit on a round table, discuss, have an agreement, then go back to their classrooms, knowing fully well that the government would do the needful. But as soon as you go and negotiate, then you go back to your classroom, the government does not respond to what it has agreed on. Then, so they feel the only option they have is to go on strike. And we have had series of strikes. So I think the lecturers also need to begin to think, what else can we do? What can we do outside the strike? Because students are suffering. Parents are suffering. Small businesses are suffering from the strike.
Well, absolutely. I think you couldn't be more right. Let me bring Waziri Adio in. Is it wrong for us to assume that strikes don't work? Because, I mean, I've heard some striking lecturers argue that probably public universities are still alive and ticking over because of the accomplishments of previous strikes. So can it be said that in every strike there is something gained? Even if it's a small thing?
We had this discussion before, and yes, there are certain things that you can attribute to previous strikes, like the TED fund itself came out of a strike by ASU. But having said that, I think it's very important for the lecturers themselves to be more creative. These are the people training people who will be solving problems of society. And I think it's very important for them to say, yes, even if you've been having some marginal gains because of these strikes, what we need is not marginal gains. We're in a crisis situation. And we need some radical rethinking. And part of what the lecturers themselves should be doing is to say, yes, we're not saying government should not fund. Possibly government should even fund more than, provide more than it's doing. But even if it does that, would that be enough for the needs of our university at this century? That is the problem. And when you say students should co-pay, people usually say, oh, you know, the poor will not be able to pay. No, you see, in every place, there are people who have the capacity to pay. Let them pay. Let them even subsidize those who don't have the capacity to pay. The people who cannot pay, let them find other ways for them. Give them scholarships, need and merit-based scholarships. Let them do work programs, you know, and some other things, right? So, but don't bring down the system because you are afraid that some people will be left out. No, you need to acknowledge that some people will not be able to pay. Even if you say 100,000 naira per annum, which is 50,000 per term, but no, per semester, some people will still not be able to pay. But make provisions for them.
Okay.
Don't bring down the system because, you know, you're afraid that some people are not able to pay.
Right. Charles Omofomwan, just listening to that, Nigeria spent nearly $400 million in foreign education in just 6 months. Those figures have just come out. In other words, that amount of money was remitted to foreign educational institutions. Imagine if that money was spent on public universities in Nigeria. What difference would that make?
Well, it will make a lot of
private people.
Yes. So it's going to make a whole lot of difference. But can it be spent or will it be spent? Parents will not want to spend such money in Nigerian universities, especially public universities, because of the perceived value they believe they will derive from that. Because when you spend education, you're investing in yourself or your kids' lives. So we don't want to spend. Even looking at basic education, how many of us have our children in public primary school? Even struggling families prefer to put their children in private primary schools because of the perceived value. So the same thing. So if the government or whoever is in charge, whether it's the university, professors, lecturers, government come together and be able to improve the standard of university education as a basic, then even parents who would have preferred to go and send their children abroad begin to invest in education. Yeah.
This conversation is going to go on for a long time, but I want to thank you very much indeed, Charles Omofomwan, and of course, Waziri Adio. Thank you very much indeed. Well, that's it for this edition of Arise Prime Time.